I am the oldest of three siblings in my family, with a younger sister named Ella. Ever since our father tragically passed away 4 years ago in a hit-and-run accident, I have taken on the role of auditor. This was a time of immense challenge, as the loss occurred just as I was graduating from college. The sudden responsibility meant I had to quickly secure a job to support my grieving mother, who had never worked outside the home, and Ella. Initially, my full-time job was sufficient, but as living costs escalated, I found myself taking on multiple jobs, working overtime, and barely resting to keep our household afloat. Despite my efforts, Ella chose a path as a teacher, a profession she is passionate about, but one that does not substantially contribute to our financial needs. The situation reached a breaking point recently when I discovered that my sister and mother had taken my car without permission and were unresponsive to my attempts to contact them while I was working tirelessly at my jobs. Their actions, combined with the ongoing financial strain and lack of support, left me feeling deeply unappreciated and exploited. Driven by frustration and a need for change, I made the difficult decision to reclaim my independence. I moved out, taking only the possessions I had personally bought. This decision wasn't made lightly. It was a necessary step for me to regain control over my life and well-being. Though I still cared deeply for my family, I realized that I could no longer sacrifice my own needs for those who didn't seem to appreciate the extent of my contributions. Navigating this new chapter, I am learning to balance my responsibilities with personal boundaries, striving for a life where I can support my loved ones without compromising my own health and happiness. I regularly shop at a standard grocery store, and while I am a proponent of healthy living, I find it unreasonable that my sister expects me to cover the cost of her expensive choices. She could easily opt for more economical alternatives that wouldn't strain my finances as much. Additionally, Ella insists on maintaining her beauty regimen with regular manicures and other beauty treatments. Sometimes, she demands I give her up to $100 to cover these expenses. When I try to express my inability to sustain her spending habits, Ella argues that as her older sister, I should support her without limitations. If I resist, she vents her frustrations on our mother, leading to scenes where she might even take money from Mom's purse. This leaves Mom short on funds and forces her to ask me for more money. Our mother, who understands the complexities of the situation, has repeatedly advised Ella to get a steady job or at least contribute financially, even if only part-time, to support her spiritual pursuits. Despite these discussions, Ella shows no interest in altering her lifestyle, which does not match our family's financial situation and adds to the family strain, burdening me further. Recently, Ella's tumultuous relationship with a man who seemed unreliable escalated. Despite his questionable actions, including spending time with other women, Ella stayed with him until she caught him outright. Their confrontation turned physical, and Ella ended up assaulting him, leading to her arrest. Although he chose not to press charges, and she was released with a warning due to this being her first offense, Ella showed no regret for her actions. Instead, she maintained that she had acted justifiably. This incident, like many others, left me hoping she might reflect and perhaps change, but it appears that Ella remains steadfast in her ways, challenging and uncompromising. Ella, ever since her recent breakup, had found herself stuck in a cycle of sorrow and avoidance, spending her days moping around the house. She leaned on her newfound single status as a justification to shirk her responsibilities. Instead of using this period as an opportunity for personal growth or healing, she had fallen into a troubling pattern of reckless behavior. Most days, she would go out with friends, visiting various bars, returning home late, often intoxicated, and occasionally with strangers. I had tried several times to initiate a conversation with her, hoping to help her realize the damage she was causing to herself and the disruption she was bringing into our lives. However, she dismissed my concerns, making me feel like I was overreacting. During a quiet moment this week, our mom pulled me aside to discuss Ella's situation more seriously. With Ella out, we could speak openly, and it was during this conversation that Mom revealed her deepening worries. She confided that she had recently discovered Ella's drug use, which was a shock to me. I had only ever known her to drink and occasionally smoke weed. This revelation explained Ella's increasing demands for money. Mom expressed fear that Ella's self-destructive path might lead to even more dangerous behavior, and she stressed the need for us to intervene. I suggested that perhaps it was time to consider professional help, like rehab, counseling, or therapy, which could offer more structured support than we were able to provide. Despite our many attempts, nothing seemed to change, and our efforts only led to arguments and dismissals. However, Mom was hesitant to leave Ella's care in the hands of professionals. She believed that as a family, it was crucial for us to be directly involved in her recovery. Surprisingly, Mom had already taken steps by researching and discovering a luxury wellness retreat she believed could help. This retreat allowed participants to bring a companion, and Mom thought it could provide a nurturing environment for them to reconnect and address Ella's issues together. I was skeptical not only about the effectiveness of such a retreat, but also about how we could afford it. Our finances were tight. After handling all our essential expenses, there was barely enough left for small luxuries, let alone a week at an upscale retreat. When I brought up these concerns, Mom gently reminded me of the savings I had been accumulating to buy a used car. She proposed that perhaps those funds could be redirected to cover the cost of the retreat for her and Ella. The suggestion took me aback. It wasn't just the financial sacrifice, but also the emotional weight of the decision. We were at a crossroads, trying to balance immediate family needs with long-term personal goals. The situation underscored the complexities of dealing with a loved one's troubles, the tough choices we sometimes have to make, and the hope that somehow we could find a way to guide Ella back to a healthier path. I was overwhelmed with a combination of surprise and frustration. I had been conscientiously saving money for a car because it was crucial for my daily life. My current commute takes nearly 5 hours each way, and having a car would significantly shorten that. Purchasing a car was not just a convenience. It was a necessity to better manage my time and alleviate the exhaustion from my lengthy travels. Moreover, owning a car would benefit my entire family by reducing the costs and inconveniences associated with public transportation, ride shares, and other methods we depend on. I shared these thoughts with my mom, emphasizing that the car was an investment in our family's future stability and well-being. However, despite my plans, my mom insisted that my sister Ella's experience was more crucial than my need for the car. She believed that a therapeutic retreat could be life-changing for Ella, especially after the loss of our father, fearing another loss in the family. I suggested a more practical alternative. Instead of an expensive retreat, finding a local counselor or therapist for Ella seemed more sensible and financially manageable. This professional could regularly work with her to tackle her emotional and mental challenges directly. I reassured my mom that I would take responsibility for finding a reputable counselor by the end of the week. Additionally, I encouraged my mom to have a heartfelt talk with Ella to persuade her to try counseling, given that she often dismissed my suggestions. I thought my mom was coming around to my perspective after our discussion. Imagine my shock and dismay when I returned home from a tiring day at work to find the house strangely silent. Usually, the house is lively with Mom watching TV or reading. I called out for them, but there was no response. Wondering if they had stepped out, I entered the kitchen and saw a note on the refrigerator. It was from my mom, saying, "Sorry we couldn't wait for you. Ella and I are on our way to the luxury retreat. I know you'll be upset, but honestly, money can always be earned back, but your sister's mental health comes first. We'll see you in a week." Staring at the note, I felt a rush of disbelief and anxiety. I hurried to my computer and checked my bank account, which my mom had access to, and discovered the financial implications of their sudden decision. Upon checking my bank account, I was engulfed by a wave of disbelief. To my horror, all the money I had diligently saved over many months was gone. My own mother had withdrawn every last cent. The realization that she could commit such a hurtful act left me feeling utterly betrayed and powerless. Tears flowed uncontrollably as I sat frozen before the computer screen, overwhelmed by a mix of shock and despair. How could she just take the money I had worked so hard to save? This was the money meant to ease my life, not to fund a lavish getaway for her and my ungrateful sister. The note she left on the fridge, nonchalantly stating that money can always be earned back, only added salt to the wound. I was the one earning the income while Mom didn't work, and Ella contributed nothing. Every day, I sacrificed my time, energy, and prospects to keep us financially stable, and now they had squandered my earnings on a holiday I didn't authorize. Since discovering the betrayal, I've left numerous angry voicemails for Mom, trying to convey the depth of my hurt, but she has ignored them all, choosing to avoid facing the issue. As for Ella, her only response was a taunting wink emoji and a text, no apology, no explanation, just a smug indication of her indifference to my anguish. This entire ordeal has left me feeling abandoned, unappreciated, and completely alone within a family for whom I have made countless sacrifices. The lack of support and acknowledgement from them has driven me to question everything. My frustration intensified when I reflected on my decision to step up after Dad's passing. I was overwhelmed with grief, yet I took it upon myself to ensure our family's financial stability. It felt like my duty, almost as though supporting them could somehow compensate for the loss of my father. Back then, I was so consumed with our collective well-being that I overlooked how little they were doing to support me, or even themselves. Now, faced with the blatant disregard for my efforts, the harsh reality that I've been taken for granted all this time has finally hit home. My family seems to expect that I will always be there to fix everything, ignoring the toll it takes on my own life. I am exhausted from shouldering this burden while they live carefree. Many have advised me to report my mom to the authorities, but I can't bring myself to take such a drastic step. As furious and let down as I am, I do not wish to see her in jail. Instead, I've decided on a different course of action, one that should have been taken long ago. I'm moving out. Despite the years spent under the same roof, driven by a sense of obligation, it's time for me to focus on my own life and well-being. If I didn't have the responsibility of covering their expenses, I could actually enjoy a stable and secure financial life. I could comfortably use my earnings, perhaps even indulge in hobbies I love or plan for my future. It's difficult to accept, but I've come to realize that my commitment to my family has been at the expense of my own happiness. I have a lot to contemplate tonight. The first step I took was to start packing up my belongings from around the house. I collected all the items I had bought over the years, kitchen gadgets, plates, home decorations, and many other essentials that made our house a home. I reached out to a good friend who kindly offered me a place to stay temporarily while I looked for my own apartment. I decided to leave the house before my mom and Ella got back, without leaving any note or explanation. I knew that any discussion about my departure would be pointless, and I wanted them to feel the full impact of my absence unexpectedly. Sure enough, when they returned and found the house empty of everything I had contributed, they started calling me nonstop. My phone was overwhelmed with voicemails from my mom, questioning where I was and what had happened to everything in the house. The irony was almost amusing. Only now, faced with an empty home and no one to depend on, did they begin to reach out in desperation, finding themselves without answers. After giving them a few hours to ponder, I called my mom back. When she answered, she told me she had put me on speaker and Ella was with her. Both were eager to know why I had vanished. My mom acknowledged she knew I was upset about them using my money and tried to excuse it by mentioning that Ella had really enjoyed her recent vacation. She argued that I shouldn't be upset anymore. I maintained my calm and informed them that I had moved out permanently and now they were on their own. Both Mom and Ella then demanded to know why I had taken such a drastic step. My mom suggested that I should have discussed it with her before leaving. I reminded her how they had secretly used up all my savings for their own benefit without informing me, spending it freely and ignoring my calls all week, avoiding any form of accountability. Now, without my financial support, they were feeling the consequences of their choices. I told them I was done supporting them. If they wanted independence, they could have it. I wasn't coming back. That's when my mom began to plead, saying I couldn't just leave them like this, and that she was now ready to sit down and talk things over. Meanwhile, Ella, still in the background, was more vocal than ever, demanding to know why I was punishing them by leaving them in such a dire situation. I had reached my breaking point after tolerating years of unappreciated sacrifices and commitments. Despite just taking a much-needed break, my mother accused me of being selfish. She highlighted that the kitchen was almost empty, with appliances missing and hardly any food left. She attempted to make me feel guilty, claiming she understood my frustration but thought I was overreacting. She urged me to calm down and return home. However, for the first time, I felt no guilt or urge to appease her or rush back to mend everything. Instead, I experienced a liberating realization that I was done with being pushed around. I was setting boundaries that had been ignored for too long. When my mother promised never to repeat her mistakes if I came back, I couldn't help but laugh. I bluntly told her that her future actions no longer concerned me. I had already taken steps to safeguard myself, including removing her access to my bank account. I also decided to stop sending money or bailing them out. They were on their own. I informed her that they still had the house my father paid for, and if they wanted to survive, they needed to find jobs and take responsibility. My sister, Ella, panicked, demanding to know how they would manage without money or food. Both she and my mother, driven by desperation, started yelling, calling me selfish and stubborn. But I was unaffected. I'd endured their guilt trips before and simply ignored their outbursts, ending the call and blocking them from contacting me further. It was incredibly satisfying. After years of putting myself second and giving my all, I was finally prioritizing my well-being. I understood that it would be a difficult lesson for them, but they needed to learn the consequences of exploiting and taking advantage of my hard work. Since then, there's been no contact with my family, as I've blocked them from my contacts and social media. For the first time in a long time, I'm living my life on my own terms, and it feels like a significant burden has been lifted. For those concerned about my mother or sister showing up at my workplace, I've informed my boss and some colleagues about the situation. They are all sympathetic and supportive. Should Ella attempt to harass me at work, it would simply give me grounds to file a police complaint against her, which would not be good for her record. I hope for her sake she avoids crossing that line. As for how my mother and Ella will manage without food or money, I honestly don't know, and at this point, I really don't care. They might still have some of the money left from what they took for their retreat, or perhaps they'll find a way to manage. They're adults. It's time they acted like it. Although the house wasn't entirely devoid of resources, and there was a possibility that they might secure jobs or seek assistance from other relatives, I made the decision to stop being their constant support. After years of prioritizing their needs over my well-being, it was time for them to navigate their own challenges. I chose to progress with my life. They did attempt to reconnect a few months back. They showed up unexpectedly at my office one evening. Seeing them, especially my exhausted mother, who looked like she hadn't slept in days, was quite jarring. My mother embraced me, tears streaming down her face, begging me to return home with them. Despite her emotional state, I stood my ground, declining to return to that toxic environment. Ella blamed me for their hardships, insisting that I had abandoned them and that it was my fault. She argued that they had learned their lesson and that she was ready to secure a job and contribute financially, just as I had always encouraged. My mother played on my emotions, suggesting that my father would be disappointed by my departure, but I calmly asserted that I believed he would be proud of my decision to prioritize my well-being. I made it clear that their unannounced visit, violating my personal boundaries, was unacceptable. I warned them against such actions in the future, stating that I would involve the authorities if necessary. I refused Ella's last-minute plea for financial help as they left, and that was the last I saw of them. I've since learned from friends in my old neighborhood that Ella still hasn't secured a job, while my mother continues to support them by working at a short diner. Hearing that Ella has moved her boyfriend in, who thankfully is employed and contributes to the household, offers some solace that there is at least some stability in their lives. I've invested significant effort into healing and moving forward since leaving home, and I choose to focus on my journey hereafter without further discussion about them.